Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Sophia, your host. The Quran says God is not questioned. What does that actually mean? We'll be looking at that as part of our Misunderstood Quranic Verses series. We're looking at chapter 21, verse 23. And with me is Dr. Shabir. Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
I want to give you a translation of this verse, from chapter 21, it's verse 23. It says, "He is not questioned about what he does, but they will be questioned." And this is the Sahih International Translation. So what does that mean, Dr. Shabir, that he's not questioned?
Yeah.
Does that mean he can act arbitrarily, do whatever he wants? What does that mean?
Interestingly, this was the conclusion of many of the classical commentators on the Quran. If you go to Tabari, Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir, and so on. So basically, what they say is that you can't question God, and of course nobody wants to question God. But what they were looking at is an apparent contradiction in some of the pieces they were putting together in explaining the whole problem of predestination. Al-Qurtubi is most clear on this matter, that in revealing that he is like trying to defeat the argument of what he called the Qadarites, that group of people who argued for human freedom. So he said this verse is a blow to them. Because why? Because this verse says you cannot question. So what question are they trying to forestall here? Let's take it a step at a time and look at the verse in its context. So prior to this verse, there is the mention of people taking gods other than God, and God is now rhetorically engaging with them and asking, okay, so where is what God do you have? You have a God from one of the entities in the heavens? Think about the angels. The angels just simply obey God. Like, what are you talking about? Where is your God in the heavens? Who else is there as a God beside me? Or do you have a God somewhere on earth? Okay, show me something that they have created that's not my creation. So in this context, God is saying, had there been, لو كان فيهما آلهة إلا الله لفسدتا. Had there been another God other than God, either in the heavens or in the heavens and the earth would have been corrupted. The logic behind this seems to be that if each God would claim his or her own domain, then there would be confusion among the gods and battles among the gods and so on for territory and ownership and control and power and so on. But God is the sole power. So in that context, our present verse says, "La yus'alu amma yaf'alu wa hum yus'alun." God is not questioned about what he does, but they are questioned. Means these other entities that people have taken to be gods, either in the heavens or on earth, those are all creatures of God who will be questioned by God. So they have an authority above them, but God does not have an authority above himself. He is the sole and total potentate. But from that, it does not follow that God does whatever he wants. Okay? Mm-hmm. Yes, the Quran says, يَفْعَلُ مَا يُرِيدُ. He does whatever he wants, if one wants to take that literally. But Muslim scholars generally agree that God does not do something that is contrary to his own nature. So God's nature is to be kind and merciful. So he doesn't act contrary to that. The Quran even says, كَتَبَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. God has prescribed mercy for himself, and so on. So God will not do something foul, evil, contemptible, dishonorable. So you might say, in terms of power, yes, he would have that ability, but in terms of character, no. Like when somebody says, I can't do such a thing, they're talking about something of their character. They're not talking about their physical ability. Physical ability, everybody has the same ability to rob, kill, and steal. But some people have a mental character which says, no, I cannot do these things. All right? It's unthinkable for me. So it's unthinkable for God to do something bad. This verse should be taken to mean that God's actions are so beyond question. Like there is no genuine question arising from his acts. Because his acts, once one looks into it some more, one will see that all of his acts are good and for good purposes. He doesn't do anything wrong or bad or questionable from that, like if you use the word questionable in that way. And if you use the word questionable in the way that to mean that he has an authority over him, the answer is clearly no. Which seems to be the main point of the verse, that others are questioned, but God is not questioned. Others have an authority above them. God does not have an authority above them. But it doesn't mean that God will do questionable things. And what the commentators are grappling with is that, there is this old dilemma. If you say that God has decreed everything that a person will do in his or her life, that means he has decreed the sins of the sinful people as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that would mean that the sinful people could not avoid committing the sins that it was decreed for them to commit. You can explain this in many different umpteen ways. Some people will say, but the fact that he decreed it did not stop the person from exercising his or her free will. But to come back to that would be to say, but the free will you're talking about here doesn't seem to be a genuine free will. It looks like the person is convinced that he or she is acting on his or her own free will. But on the, going deeper, you see that this was already pre-programmed for this person to make the choices that the person has made. And so when it comes to this stage, that is when the classical commentators and even modern writers on the subject of the predestination, they come back to this verse. They fall back on this verse to say, but you can't question God.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in fact, the question is not a question directed at God. The question is directed at the current writers. If you say that God did it this way, then aren't you saying that God did something questionable?
Mm-hmm.
So we're not questioning God, but we're questioning you for suggesting that God did something questionable. Yeah. So in sum, we would say that this verse, in its context, obviously means that God does not have anyone above him to question him. But we should not take that to mean that means that God does questionable acts, but just that nobody dares to question him. We should take it to mean that, as a derivation from that, we can say that God does not do questionable things.
Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Muslim Media Hub, the new home of Let the Quran Speak.
Here we spread positivity and good. We help people experience the beauty of Islam and help them appreciate and understand Muslims.
This beautiful building we purchased at cost $2.3 million.
Yeah, we've already raised a third of that money, and with your help, inshallah, we can pay off the rest.
So we're looking for people who can give $1,000 each. If you can be part of the select group, that's amazing.
Otherwise, just please give whatever you can. Every dollar counts.
It's our collective responsibility to share the message of Islam with our fellow human beings. Please help us continue this good work.
It's a sadaqah jariyah, something that will continue to be a benefit to the Muslim community long after Safiya and I are gone.
Please support our work at muslimmediahub.com.
Your support is zakat eligible and tax deductible.
May Allah bless you and your loved ones today and always. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.